After the World War II, relations between the Soviet bloc and the democratic countries deteriorated again. The demarcation line ran through Germany, dividing the country into East and West, and although it was hardly imaginable just a couple of years ago, by the late 1940s both blocs were rearming the Germans with the most advanced equipment. And soon West Germany faced the issue of developing its own new tank, capable of repelling a potential invasion by the Soviet steel horde. At that time, in the eternal sword and shield struggle, the scales were very much tipped in favor of the sword. The new hit and discarding saber shells penetrated armor of such thickness that was impossible to mount on a tank and keep its weight, dimensions and cost within reasonable limits. Composite armor would eventually restore the balance, but in early 1950s it was quite logical to rely on high mobility and firepower of the tank, while keeping its armor relatively light. The design specification called for a tank weighing up to 30 tons, with the power-to-weight ratio of 30 horsepower per ton, a cannon of at least 105 mm caliber, all-round protection against 20 mm guns, as well as chemical, biological and nuclear weapons, which were considered to be almost as great a threat to a tank as grenade launchers and other tanks. However, the requirements for armor, at least for the frontal, were gradually increasing. The weight of the tank reached 40 tons, but it still remained highly mobile. So, in 1956, under those specifications, work began on a new project codenamed Eurotank. The post-war German economy was hardly in its best condition, so it was necessary to look for partners to share the development costs with. France and Italy became such partners, but the cooperation did not last long. First, the Italians decided that it would be better to wait until someone else had taken all the lumps during development, and then to buy a license and produce the finished product. The French suddenly fell out with their NATO partners, and although they did not formally withdraw from the alliance, they decided to do things their own way. In particular, their main anti-tank round was a Bus G with rather unique design. The barrel's turn of rifling had to be increased to accommodate it, but this made the gun unsuitable for the main NATO APDS projectiles at the time. The Germans wanted to comply with NATO standards as much as possible, so eventually they had to carry the entire project themselves. In 1959, three design teams were assembled with each tasked to produce two prototypes. Team A was headed by Porsche, Team B by Ruhrstahl, and Team C by Borgward. Rheinmetall and Wegmann were responsible for designing the tank turrets. The prototypes from the first two teams were ready the following year, while the highly original prototype C was delayed due to financial problems at Borgward, which unfortunately went bankrupt in 1961 and thus dropped out of the competition. In 1963, Porsche's second prototype officially won the competition and was adopted as the Leopard, without a 1 index at the time. Its production lasted until 1985, and a total of 4,744 tanks were assembled, plus 1,741 combat and engineering vehicles derived from it. By the way, the Italian Otto Melara did acquire a license and produced 640 Leopards, while the French created the AMX-30, which looks very similar to the Leopard but is completely different. So the production Leopard is 9.5 meters long, with the gun forward, 3.25 meters wide and 2.4 meters high. The thickness of the upper glacis is 70 millimeters, with 60 degrees angle of inclination. The sides are protected by 30-35 millimeters of armor, the bottom and stern by 20 and 25 millimeters respectively. The frontal armor of the initial cast turret was 60 millimeters, but during several upgrades it was reinforced with additional protection. In the A3 and A4 versions, the turret was welded, which didn't offer more protection but provided a larger internal volume. This lightweight armor made the total weight of the tank only 40 tons, with an additional 2.5 tons added to the A5 version after the upgrade. The tank is powered by a 37.4-liter 10-cylinder diesel engine with two superchargers. The maximum output is 830 horsepower and consumption is approximately 190 liters per 100 kilometers in optimal conditions. That is, Leopard 1 can travel 600 kilometers on the highway and 450 kilometers off-road on one full refueling. The top speed is 64 km per hour, but in fact it can go much faster. Instead, the engine has a limiter to increase its service life before major repairs are required. Leopard's reversing speed is 24 km per hour, which is extremely convenient for changing positions in combat. The Soviet T-64, T-72 and even the latest Russian T-90 can reverse at less than 5 kph. So for quick reposition, those tanks have to turn around first and only then speed up, losing time and exposing their vulnerable stern. By the way, the Leopard's transmission is automatic with a torque converter, but it still allows to push-start the tank, which is impossible in regular cars with automatic transmission. Leopard is extremely easy to drive. It has two pedals and a convenient steering wheel instead of levers. Shift your gearbox to drive, push pedal to the metal and you're off. Moreover, the commander can control the movement from his seat, and there's also a device to remotely control the tank via cable or radio channel. This could be extremely useful, for example, to keep driver safe when crossing water obstacles along the bottom. The entire power unit with transmission can be replaced in the field by the crew in about 20 minutes. But in today's settings it is very dangerous with drones constantly circling overhead. That's why tanks are mostly hauled to the rear to be fixed by repair battalions like our 508th. The British Royal Ordnance L7A3 rifled gun became the Leopard's main weapon. Its caliber is 105 mm and length 52 calibers. At first it didn't have a stabilizer, but the Germans removed this issue starting with the A2 version. However, the ability to effectively engage targets while on the move only appeared in the A5 version, after the installation of an electro-hydraulic stabilizer and the modern MS-18 fire control system. It was based on the MS-15 from the Leopard 2, retaining all the main features. The gunner's main sight has a 12 times magnification with a 5-degree viewing angle. It also has thermal imaging channel and a laser rangefinder. The commander has a separate panoramic sight, also receiving the image from the main sight. In combat, the commander searches for targets, turns the turret in approximate right direction, and then gives control to the gunner, who performs all the necessary actions to make an accurate shot. And in the meantime, the commander is already looking for a new target. The ballistic computer is capable of calculating a shot at a distance up to 4 kilometers. It automatically adjusts for the type of projectile, powder temperature, atmospheric conditions, vehicle inclination and barrel wear. It can also lead shots at moving targets. Normally, it is the gunner who fires, but if necessary, the commander can also take a shot. And just in case, the gunner also has the good old optical sight. Another important upgrade to the A5 version included the development of improved DM-23 and DM-33 APDS shells, which penetrate approximately the same armor as do the 125mm Mango shells currently used by Russian troops. The Leopard's high-explosive shells are slightly lighter than those used by main Soviet tanks, but they are also quite effective due to high quality. Of course, the 120mm gun of Leopard 2 is better, but the good old L7 remains relevant on the modern battlefield. By the way, the Leopard 1 A5 modification provided for the possibility of installing a 120mm gun with one tank successfully tested. However, back in the 80s, the Germans decided that the improvement in combat capabilities did not justify the cost of replacement. Therefore, the Leopards finished their service in the Bundeswehr with the trusty 105. Finally, one of the most important upgrades in the A5 version was the installation of the high-pressure washers for the driver's periscopes. Of course, if the tank cannot see where it is going, it is usually not the tank's problem, but it is still better when the driver can see something. The Leopard also has two machine guns, one coaxial and an anti-aircraft gun located next to the commander's hatch. As you see, for now both are removed, but on most variants this would be the classic MG3, a slightly simplified and improved version of the MG42 from the World War II. Contracts on military equipment sales usually include a clause requiring the buyer to obtain permission from the manufacturer in the event of subsequent sale or transfer to a third party. Therefore, despite the large number of those willing to sell us the Leopards, Ukraine had to wait until February 2023, when the German government made the relevant political decision. But cooperation with the manufacturer was necessary in any case, as these vehicles weren't new, requiring repairs and modernization. Most Leopard 1s delivered to Ukraine are refurbished A5 versions. However, there are some rather unique modifications, such as 1993 model developed for the Danish army. In addition to all the standard A5 upgrades, it has a separate Honda power generator, an improved fire extinguishing system, and air conditioning in the combat compartment. Your Mercedes-Benz S-Class among tanks. Externally, Danish Leopards can be distinguished from regular A5s by the welded turret, which was inherited from the A3 version. The rest of the A5s were upgraded from older versions with cast turrets. This Leopard seems to be Danish, alas, without luxury upgrades. So, Leopard 1 began its combat operations in Ukraine in November 2023, and despite its age, it has earned a reputation of a reliable and effective vehicle. A well-trained crew can fire 10 rounds per minute, while its Russian opponents fire 6 to 10 rounds. Add a modern fire control system that allows accurate fire from a distance of 4 kilometers during the day and about 3 kilometers at night, and you get a real hunter capable of taking down prey that doesn't even know it's being hunted. And after taking the shot that may disclose the tank's position, Leopard can quickly roll back to cover. It is true, the armor of the first Leopard is really weak, but it doesn't matter if the enemy even has no time to see it. The main thing is to be well aware of the advantages and disadvantages of this vehicle and use it in combat appropriately. According to OSINT checkers, as of the end of the March 2025, only 17 Leopards were lost. So there are reasons to believe that they are being used properly. By the way, our Leopards have been additionally equipped with ERA tiles and anti-drone nets. Drones are the biggest threat to tanks nowadays, so we had to take necessary steps, even though the extra weight slightly impaired mobility. The tank's other advantages include comfortable conditions for the crew, simple maintenance and very quiet motion. The enemy can hear the Leopard 1 from a much shorter distance compared to Soviet tanks, and cannot immediately identify the sound as a tank. More than 500 of the first Leopards are still in service in Greece, almost 400 in Turkey, 378 in Brazil, 200 in Chile, and as the experience of deterring Russian aggression has shown, it is too early to write off this tank as a scrap metal. It just so happened that it first met the opponent it was designed to fight 60 years later, and it's a completely different tank now. To be fair, old Soviet Ts also received many upgrades. Yet it is safe to say that the concept of a mobile sniper tank is quite successful and effective, although not very versatile. So it was our first video of this type, and we can't wait to see your feedback in the comments below. And as usual, support 508, trust Ukrainian army, and forward to victory!